What happens when a respected banker's carefully constructed life comes crumbling down at the hands of betrayal, scandal, and danger? Meet Robert, a 44-year-old financial consultant whose picture-perfect marriage to Sandra, a 42-year-old marketing executive, spirals into chaos after a drunken revelation at an upscale social event. But the unraveling doesn't stop there. Robert's journey to escape his marriage leads him to Reno's glittering casinos, illegal financial schemes, and a life-altering connection with a woman named Dora. Will Robert reclaim control, or will the tangled web of deceit consume him? The evening began like countless others, with Robert reluctantly accompanying Sandra to another lavish county club event. At 44, Robert was a seasoned financial consultant who thrived on precision and control, yet these gatherings made him feel utterly powerless. Sandra, his wife of 18 years, and a successful 42-year-old marketing executive, adored the spotlight. She thrived on the social buzz, the clink of champagne glasses, and the laughter that accompanied her stories. But tonight, Sandra seemed more unrestrained than usual. Her wine glass was never empty, and her laughter grew louder with each sip. Robert, seated beside her, braced himself as her charm turned into something sharper. The conversation turned personal, a little too personal, when Sandra leaned forward and shared a story about a man who, according to her, just got her in a way no one else did. The name she mentioned wasn't Robert's. It was a man he barely knew, but the implication was clear. A hush fell over the table as Sandra's words hung in the air. Robert's colleagues avoided his gaze, their smiles stiff and uncomfortable. The humiliation coursed through him like fire, his composure unraveling as Sandra laughed off her own remarks, oblivious to the damage she'd caused. For Robert, this was the culmination of years of hurt. Sandra's love for attention had always been a sore point, but this public betrayal was something he couldn't ignore. He excused himself, his hands trembling with anger, and left the club without another word. The cold night air hit him like a slap, but it wasn't enough to numb the sting of Sandra's words. Driving home in silence, Robert knew that this moment marked a turning point. He could no longer dismiss Sandra's behavior as harmless or chalk it up to her love for a good time. It was deeper than that, something broken beyond repair. The ride home was a blur, his thoughts spiraling as he replayed the night's events. Robert gripped the steering wheel tightly, trying to keep the anger at bay, but it was no use. Sandra had crossed a line that couldn't be undone. Over the years, Robert had made countless excuses for her behavior. She worked hard, he'd tell himself. She needed to unwind. But this, publicly insinuating that another man understood her better than her own husband, it wasn't just disrespect, it was betrayal. When he pulled into the driveway, he sat in the car for a long moment, staring at their darkened house. He thought about their marriage, their shared history, and the countless times he'd swallowed his pride to keep the peace. But the weight of those compromises now felt suffocating. Inside, Sandra was still awake, scrolling through her phone with a glass of wine in hand. She barely looked up when he entered, her face still flushed from the evening's revelry. "Did you have to leave so abruptly?" she asked, her tone light, as if the night's events had been a mere hiccup. Robert didn't answer. Instead, he walked past her, straight to the bedroom, and began packing a bag. The sight of him folding clothes seemed to jolt Sandra out of her nonchalance. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice tinged with irritation. "I need some time away," Robert replied evenly, refusing to meet her gaze. Sandra scoffed, brushing off his words with a dismissive wave. "Oh, don't be so dramatic." But Robert wasn't being dramatic. For the first time in years, he felt a clarity he hadn't known he needed. As he booked a flight to Reno on his phone, a sense of resolve settled over him. This wasn't about running away, it was about finding himself again. For too long, he'd allowed Sandra's antics to dictate the terms of their marriage. Now, he was determined to take back control, even if it meant leaving behind everything he'd built. The next morning, Robert found himself on a plane to Reno, a city known for its neon-lit casinos and promises of a fresh start for those seeking an escape. As the plane descended over the sprawling lights, Robert felt an odd sense of liberation. He had no grand plan, no itinerary, just a desire to leave the chaos of his life behind, even if only for a few days. Checking into a modest hotel, Robert wandered into a nearby casino. The hum of slot machines and the occasional cheer from a winning table provided a strange comfort. It was a place where people came to lose themselves, and that's exactly what Robert wanted. Sitting at a blackjack table, Robert felt a rush he hadn't experienced in years. With every deal of the cards, his focus sharpened, and for a few moments, the weight of Sandra's betrayal faded. He played cautiously at first, his background in finance guiding his decisions. But as the hours passed and the chips in front of him grew, Robert realized that his skills extended beyond spreadsheets and reports. The night unfolded with a mix of luck and strategy. But it wasn't just about the money. For Robert, it was about control, something he hadn't felt in years. Here, in the dimly lit casino, he was the one calling the shots. As he cashed out his winnings, he noticed something peculiar and almost untraceable way the casino handled deposits. His analytical mind kicked in, piecing together how someone could exploit the system to hide funds. The thought intrigued him, not for criminal purposes, but as a means of protecting himself. If he were to leave Sandra for good, he would need to ensure that his finances were beyond her reach. That night, lying in his hotel room, Robert felt a flicker of hope. Reno wasn't just a distraction, it was an opportunity to rebuild, to reclaim his autonomy. The city had given him more than a chance to gamble, it had given him a glimpse of freedom. The next morning, Robert's mind was ablaze with ideas. The banking practices he'd observed at the casino seemed almost too good to be true, but the more he thought about it, the more he realized their potential. As a financial consultant, Robert knew how to navigate the complexities of money. This newfound knowledge could be his ticket to freedom. He spent the day researching, poring over online forums and speaking casually with casino staff to confirm his theories. The loophole was real, and it was simple enough to use without raising suspicion. It was the perfect way to safeguard his savings, ensuring that Sandra couldn't touch them in the event of a divorce. But as Robert planned his financial escape, he couldn't ignore the growing sense of unease. Sandra wasn't the type to let go easily, especially not when it came to money. Her sharp tongue and manipulative tendencies had been tools she wielded expertly throughout their marriage. If she caught wind of his plans, there was no telling what she might do. That evening, Robert returned to the casino, not to gamble but to observe. He watched as people moved through the space, their faces illuminated by the glow of slot machines. Among them, he spotted a waitress moving gracefully between tables. There was something about her quiet confidence, the way she smiled even when patrons were less than kind, that caught his attention. Her name was Dora, and their paths crossed when she brought him a coffee at the bar. They exchanged polite conversation at first, but something about her presence felt grounding, even comforting. She mentioned that she was working to make ends meet after leaving her husband, and Robert found himself opening up in return. As they talked, Robert realized that he wasn't as alone as he'd thought. Dora was also navigating the wreckage of a broken relationship, and her resilience inspired him. For the first time since leaving home, Robert felt a sense of connection, a reminder that even amidst the chaos, there were people who understood his struggles. The days in Reno stretched into a week as Robert immersed himself in a world far removed from the controlled chaos of his previous life. By now, he had firmly decided that his marriage to Sandra was over. Yet the realization wasn't as liberating as he had hoped. Sitting in his hotel room one evening, surrounded by stacks of notes and financial documents, Robert's thoughts wandered back to the life he and Sandra had built together. They had once been a team partners who faced life's challenges together. But over the years, the partnership had turned one-sided. Sandra's charisma had transformed from something he admired to something that left him feeling invisible. The county club incident was merely the final blow in a marriage riddled with cracks. It wasn't just her public humiliation that hurt, it was the realization that Sandra had little respect for him, their relationship, or their history. As he pieced together the timeline of their life, Robert couldn't ignore the signs of infidelity that he had once dismissed. Subtle changes in her routine, unexplained absences, and the cold indifference that had crept into their conversations all painted a damning picture. For Robert, divorce wasn't just about ending the marriage, it was about reclaiming his identity. He knew Sandra would fight him every step of the way, not out of love but out of pride and control. He needed to be prepared, not just emotionally but financially. The loopholes he had uncovered at the casino became the foundation of his strategy, a way to shield his assets from Sandra's grasp. But the thought of confronting Sandra filled him with dread. She was a master manipulator, capable of twisting any situation to her advantage. Robert knew that leaving her wouldn't just be an act of courage, it would be a battle. And while he was ready to fight, the fear of what Sandra might do next lingered in the back of his mind. It was during one of his late-night visits to the casino bar that Robert encountered Dora again. She was on her break, sipping a cup of coffee and staring at the blinking lights of the slot machines. Something about her demeanor, calm yet weary, drew Robert to her. This time, their conversation went deeper. Dora shared fragments of her life, her marriage to Tony, a man who had once been loving but had turned controlling and abusive. She had left him months ago, fleeing to Reno to start over, but the scars of their relationship lingered. Robert listened intently, moved by her honesty. In her story, he saw echoes of his own struggles, not the physical danger, but the emotional manipulation and sense of entrapment. Dora, too, was fighting to reclaim her life, and her courage inspired him. As the night wore on, their conversation shifted to lighter topics, from favorite books to the best diners in town. For the first time in weeks, Robert laughed, a genuine, unforced laugh that caught him off guard. Dora's warmth and resilience were a stark contrast to the cold, calculating environment he had left behind. Their connection deepened over the next few days, with Robert and Dora finding solace in each other's company. They weren't looking for romance, just understanding. Yet their bond became a lifeline, a reminder that they weren't alone in their struggles. But their fragile peace was shattered when Tony showed up at the casino one evening. Dora's face turned pale as she spotted him across the room, his eyes scanning the crowd with predatory intent. Robert didn't hesitate. He stood by Dora, ready to protect her at any cost. The confrontation was brief but intense, with Tony making veiled threats before being escorted out by security. It was a sobering reminder of the dangers Dora still faced and the lengths Robert might have to go to protect himself from Sandra's potential retaliation. The days following Tony's appearance were fraught with tension. Dora tried to return to her routine, but Robert could see the fear in her eyes. She brushed off his concerns, insisting she was fine, but her guard was always up. Meanwhile, Robert's thoughts shifted to Sandra. He hadn't heard from her since his abrupt departure, but he knew her well enough to suspect she wasn't sitting idly by. One evening, while sharing dinner at a quiet diner, Dora opened up about her plans to leave Reno. She feared Tony's persistence and didn't want to put Robert in harm's way. Robert protested, arguing that running would only embolden Tony. "You don't understand," Dora said softly, her voice tinged with resignation. "Men like Tony don't just go away. They take everything they can before they're done." Before Robert could respond, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Sandra, short and cryptic: "Come home now, or you'll regret it." His heart sank as he stared at the screen, the implications of her words swirling in his mind. Dora noticed his expression and asked what was wrong. Reluctantly, Robert explained the precarious situation with Sandra, her vindictiveness, and his fears of what she might do next. Dora listened intently, then made a surprising offer. "Let me help you," she said. "I've dealt with Tony for years. I know how to handle people like Sandra." Robert hesitated, reluctant to drag her further into his mess, but Dora was insistent. "You've been there for me," she said. "Let me return the favor." Their conversation was interrupted when Tony burst into the diner, his face twisted with anger. Before Robert could react, Tony lunged at Dora, accusing her of betraying him. Robert intervened, shielding Dora and shouting for help. The altercation ended with Tony being restrained by the diner staff and later arrested, but not before Dora sustained a minor injury. Despite her shaken demeanor, Dora reassured Robert that she was fine. "It's nothing," she said, brushing off his concern. But the incident only solidified their bond, as both realized they were fighting similar battles against controlling and manipulative people who sought to dominate their lives. Returning to his hotel that night, Robert found an unsettling surprise waiting for him. A pair of uniformed police officers stood at the door, holding a warrant for his arrest. Stunned, Robert tried to ask what this was about, but the officers were curt, stating only that it involved allegations of fraud and embezzlement. As he was escorted to the station, Robert's mind raced. Fraud? Embezzlement? None of it made sense until he remembered Sandra's message earlier that evening. She was behind this. It was a trap, her way of forcing him back under her control. Hours later, Robert was released on bail. Courtesy of a lawyer, Dora had called on his behalf. As they sat in her car outside the station, Robert felt a surge of gratitude and guilt. "You didn't have to do this," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Dora simply smiled. "We look out for each other, remember?" The charges against Robert turned out to be baseless, but the damage was done. Sandra had weaponized the law to humiliate and intimidate him, a tactic that reinforced her manipulative nature. Robert knew he couldn't face her directly. She was too cunning, too vindictive. With Dora's help, he began crafting a strategy to protect himself. They combed through his finances, ensuring Sandra couldn't access his assets. Dora, drawing on her own experience with Tony, offered advice on staying one step ahead of someone who thrived on control. But Sandra wasn't done. Over the next few days, she sent a flurry of messages, ranging from pleas for reconciliation to outright threats. "You'll regret this," one text read, accompanied by a photo of the two of them from happier times. It was clear that Sandra wasn't just trying to hurt Robert, she wanted to break him. Amidst the chaos, Robert found solace in his growing friendship with Dora. They weren't just two people running from their pasts, they were allies, helping each other rebuild their lives piece by piece. And though the road ahead was uncertain, Robert felt a newfound determination to see it through, no matter what Sandra had planned. Robert's resolve to break free from Sandra's manipulative grasp hardened with each passing day. He and Dora worked tirelessly to safeguard his assets and lay the groundwork for his escape. Yet the emotional weight of Sandra's threats lingered, a constant reminder of how far she was willing to go to maintain control. One evening, Robert received an ominous call from Sandra. Her voice was cold and calculated, the warmth he once loved completely gone. "You think you can just walk away?" she hissed. "You don't know who you're dealing with." The call ended abruptly, leaving Robert to grapple with a mixture of fear and anger. Meanwhile, Dora faced her own battles. Tony, despite being arrested, had managed to secure bail and was now actively stalking her. One night, he followed her to the motel where Robert was staying, pounding on the door and shouting obscenities. When Robert opened the door, he found himself face to face with the man who had caused Dora so much pain. The confrontation was explosive. Tony accused Dora of betrayal and hurled threats at both of them. Robert stood his ground, refusing to be intimidated, but it was clear that Tony's presence posed a real danger. Dora, shaken but defiant, urged Robert to press forward with his plans. "We can't let people like them win," she said. Fueled by her words, Robert took a decisive step. He contacted a private investigator to gather evidence of Sandra's manipulative tactics and any potential illegal activity she might be involved in. The investigator uncovered a trail of questionable financial dealings tied to Sandra, providing Robert with leverage he hadn't anticipated. Armed with this information, he filed for divorce, ensuring that Sandra's threats wouldn't derail his plans for freedom. With legal proceedings underway, Robert found himself at a crossroads. The process of separating from Sandra was grueling, but he knew it was the only way to reclaim his life. Meanwhile, his bond with Dora continued to deepen. Their shared experiences had forged a connection neither of them had expected, and they began to dream of a life free from the shadows of their pasts. One evening, as they sat by the neon-lit windows of a quiet cafe, Dora spoke about her plans to leave Reno. "I need to start over," she said, her voice tinged with hope and uncertainty. "Somewhere far from here, where Tony can't find me." Robert nodded, understanding the need for a fresh start. "Maybe we both do," he replied. Their conversation was interrupted by a call from Robert's lawyer. The evidence against Sandra had proven effective. Her threats were now being investigated by the authorities, and her grip on Robert was loosening. For the first time in months, Robert felt a glimmer of hope. As the legal battles unfolded, Robert and Dora decided to take a leap of faith. They packed their belongings and set out on a journey to an undisclosed location, determined to leave behind the chaos and pain that had defined their lives. Their destination didn't matter. What mattered was the promise of a new beginning, free from the toxic relationships that had held them back. The story ends with Robert and Dora standing on the edge of a serene landscape, the sun setting in the distance. They exchange a quiet look of understanding, ready to face whatever the future holds together. Thanks for watching. Thank you for joining me on this emotional and suspenseful journey. If you enjoyed the story, please like, share, and comment below with your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more engaging content like this. Stay tuned for the next story.